So, welcome to Rik Rants. 60 minutes ranting about governance. I know it's hard to tell from my youthful complexion and beautiful hair, but I'm knocking on a bit. And what that means is these days I'm a consultant, and I go out to clients and give them the benefit of my opinion. Sorry, I mean experience, benefit of my experience. And what that means is that I can take what I'm seeing at my customers and reflect that back to people like yourselves, hopefully to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes that I and Magnus and Stefan and all the speakers here see all the time. So because it's the last session of the day, I thought what we'd do is in that true spirit of around the campfire, we're telling ghost stories. I want to try and convince you that governance is really essential to successfully using cloud. And to do that, I'm going to work my way through a series of car crashes as I go through and explain what governance I think you need. So, audience participation time. How many of you think of yourselves as developers? Okay, that's about 2/3. How many of you think of yourselves as IT pros? Okay, you're not alone. I too am an IT pro. And how many of you think of yourselves as BAs or project managers or that sort of, you know, we don't really code anymore. We just get people to code for us. Okay, cool. Right, so that was about 4 or 5. So I like talking to the people who are not managers at events like this, because you are the people who are normally first through the gate into the machine gun fire that is a new cloud project. And if I can get you to think about the governance and the management of those projects, then you will save yourselves, your teammates, and your companies an awful lot of time and pain. So, consultants in the room will look at this and go, how many times have we been on site and our customer says, yep, it's our first cloud project, we're doing it in the cloud because IT they don't have the bandwidth. We hate IT, they're horrible, they sit there in their jackets in their darkened room, you know, playing whatever it is they play, they don't talk to us. So we're doing this without them. Good plan, but it's not going to end badly. Or, the other one I like, yeah, governance, that's going to take a while. We don't know cloud. We're learning on this project. We're agile. So we're going to build the prototype, and we're going to take the learnings, and then we'll worry about the governance. Okay, then. I can't see a problem with that. Car crash number 3. We're new to cloud. So we've put our best people on it. We value them, they're brilliant, they're going to work it out as they go along and share that knowledge across the organization. Okay? Now, occasionally, very occasionally, I walk into a customer and they said that, and they've built the most beautiful, elegant, carefully managed, responsive, everything works piece of cloud code imaginable. Normally, however, they've fallen into one of several traps. This was great when we built it and tested it, but now we're running in production. It's really expensive. Cloud's supposed to be cheaper, right? I'll give you a quick example of that. Customer of ours, they built a genuinely beautiful event grid, watched blob storage, triggered a logic app, was reading an input file from a vendor, processed EDI data, threw stuff in back-end databases. Brilliant. Unfortunately, another project team said, hey, you've got blob storage. You've got an FTP server in front of that, and we need to FTP thousands of images into our stock catalog, so we're going to use your FTP server and drop it in your blob storage. And over one weekend, they racked up over £1,000 worth of Logic App triggers because they uploaded nearly 1 million images. Previous to that, the elegant solution ticked over at about 10 quid a day. Or we built the project, we were first in through the gate, we've picked all these beautiful technologies, and we've deployed them. And then the security guys go, hang on a minute, you've put that in West Europe. I need it in UK South. You can't put your data outside the UK. What are you doing? Because we didn't check beforehand whether we could use services in regions that are not our specific ones. Or we've built this thing, but there's absolutely no way of telling who's accessing our data, from where. Are they valid users? Are they not valid users? Or even just what on earth is our application doing? Are our logic apps working? Is this Schrodinger's solution? It's neither working nor failing because we can't tell because there's no logging. If you're a big enterprise, you're going to want to charge back, right? Because you don't want to pay for HR's integrations. But if we haven't considered that, how are we going to manage that? How are we going to identify which bits of the stuff running inside our subscriptions we need to charge back to HR, which ones we pay for ourselves, or what? Related to where's our data, where does our service run? Particularly if you decide that you're going to use preview services, which is a whole raft of questions in itself. Azure isn't uniform. Not every region has all of the services you might want. If you couple the fact that, I don't know, speech recognition might not be deployed in the UK with I cannot move my data outside the UK, then we shouldn't be using cognitive services speech processing at all. So why didn't we spot that before we made the project live? Because now we're screwed. And then last but not least, the good old favorite of GDPR, we're putting personally identifiable information somewhere in the cloud, and we're not doing anything to track it, secure it, manage it, and you know what? Possibly it might even not, shouldn't even be there in the first place. It's nice to see our testing and production voice-to-speech has completely given up on me. So, how do we avoid this admittedly beautiful, we spent a fortune on the special effects, car crash, you know, with fireworks and explosions and everything? The answer is we need to build some governance. And look, governance doesn't have to be some great wodge of paper that you club to death your new intern developers with and sort of beat it into them. It can be really lightweight. The simplest governance is, you know what, we have no governance. But here is the process by which we identify if we need governance, and we'll create that governance. So you can be the first guys off the boat, onto the beach, taking fire, working out what you're going to do, so long as one of the things you're working out is, what is that governance? What do we need to plan and manage? So I like to think of this in several areas, and because I'm with a technical audience, I'm going to start with the technical one. We need to have governance around what we are using. Martin might sit there and go, you know what, everything should be functions. Functions, functions, functions. And Steve Yan's going, no, logic apps, man. Absolutely logic apps. That's okay. But maybe we need a set of criteria by which we decide on those technology choices. And some of those are going to relate to, are they generally available? Do we think that Microsoft is going to get so far with this beautiful piece of whatever and then pull the plug just before we go into production with it? Large organizations particularly, you really shouldn't be using preview services. There is a risk there. Arguably, even agile startups that don't normally seem to care. Using it early in its life cycle is great for learning, but not necessarily great for your production code. Similarly, we need to think about restricting our technology choice based on where our data needs to go. So if a service isn't available in a region that I'm going to have to use, I can't use that service. And slowly but surely, we're going to whittle down the available Lego bricks, which will inform what kind of thing we can build. But also, what do we know? If we're all C#.NET developers to a man with 1 million years experience, why would we decide to build a Node app? Or start putting Python in functions? Unless there's a specific piece of our application where that is absolutely the best technology, and then we need a volunteer to go and learn it. If you're already doing something new by moving to the cloud, why would you pile risk on top of risk by doing it with things that you've never touched before as a technology team? The reason a lot of people choose Azure is because deep down underneath, there's a Microsoft stack there, right? You know, we can bring everything we've learned from all those years of being Microsoft stack developers and bring it along for the ride. Now, that's not to say if you've built something in Java, like we were hearing earlier on this morning, that you can't bring that. But again, if you've got an app written in Java that you want to pull to the cloud, why would you choose to rewrite it in .NET? Run it as Java. And if you've already got an on-prem architecture that you're comfortable and you know, and when you look at the cloud analog of that on-prem technology, there is one, and it's released, and it's in the right region, and you feel you understand it, and it does what you want, why not use it? Sure, Cosmos DB is the new hotness. But if you've got 20 years of legacy SQL, wouldn't it be easier to use Azure SQL because you're only going to change the bits that aren't your data at that point? Why re-platform and change our data structure? You know, let's think about managing the risk. And then finally, how they deal with your data is really important. So I said earlier, I was talking about COG services, right? So brilliant. COG services in the UK, tick. It's GA, more or less. Yeah, okay, tick. What about training data? Hang on a minute. In some circumstances, Microsoft might retrieve what I've passed to speech recognition and use it to train their model. I might not want that. I might not be able to do that because that data might whistle off to the States. That's not going to be any good for my National Health Service clients. So we need to look. We need to look at the small print in the services. See if they do something like that. See if we can turn it off. And if we can't, sorry, cross it off the list. Or look for a way of running it as part of my solution deployed within something else. And then we get, where are we going to put stuff? Now, you might think this one's obvious, because I've already talked about, where our service is available. How many of you have spent the most joyous lunchtimes playing with the Azure price calculator? No? See, Carl, I knew it would be you, man. Not all Azure regions are created equal. I'm from the UK. That means I pay a 20% premium if I deploy to UK regions. Yay, go Brexit. Now that's kind of important and slightly crazy. So I've had UK government customers who say, no, it's all got to go in the UK. Nothing can leave the UK. And I go, that's fine. That's 20% more expensive. Well, Amsterdam's not far away. It's just across the water. It'll be fine. At the end of the day, that bottom line is a really key driver. Slight tangent. We're going to play a quiz. Actually, no, it might be a crazy quiz. How many types of Azure subscription do you think there are? Let's ignore how you can buy Azure, because there's at least 3 or 4 different ways you can do that. But how many kinds of subscription do you think there are? So who thinks 1? Okay. Either you all know, or you think it's a trick question. I'm not sitting there. 2? Okay. More than 2? Okay, right. I don't care about the more than 2. I do care about the 2. Production, dev. The magical thing about a dev test subscription type is it's 20% cheaper. Well, can be. So different services in a dev test sub get different amounts of discount. Here's the thing, though. We should absolutely do our development in a dev test subscription, but there's one key thing missing from a dev test subscription. There's no SLA. So if your stuff stops, Microsoft don't give you any money back and they don't care. They just go, very sorry. But you probably wouldn't be surprised. I can count the fingers of a clenched fist how many customers I go and visit that have already set up separate subscriptions for development and test and production. Just that simple thing to save money and then work out where we're going to put stuff. Because bluntly, if we're not using real data, why can't we dev in Amsterdam even if we have to deploy prod to Slough? Because if you squint, you can't really tell them apart. You know, there's a river running through Slough and everything. So little things like that are important. We also need to think about where our customers are. So I work with a lot of UK companies, but they're providing services to people outside the UK. Some of them are even fortunate enough to be providing services to US Gov. Where you can deploy your customers' services may not relate quite the way you'd think to where you can deploy your stuff. If you're doing any services for like US law enforcement, you've got to put those solutions in the US government cloud. I'm not sure what the story is with Germany these days, because I know that they're slowly dismantling that one. But originally, the idea behind the German cloud was that it was suitable for government work. Everybody thinks that the UK cloud is a UK government cloud. It's not, it's just in the UK, and they said they didn't care. But that's important, right? If my customer cares about where their data goes, my services and applications have to live in the same place. And then finally, it's not just about where my customers are, speed of access, latency, all that kind of stuff. It's where does their data need to live? And that might even be another interesting nuance. So a lot of organizations I work for choose to store their customer data in a separate subscription than the application itself sometimes. And the reason for that is because when the customer says, I hate you, I'm never going to talk to you again, I'm leaving and I'm taking my data with me, then the company providing the service simply says, absolutely no problem. I don't want to fall out with you, Magnus. You can have your data. We'll simply transfer ownership of the subscription with your data in to you. And then all of that crazy process about have you deleted my data in accordance with all of these scary laws kind of goes away because I've just given you the whole lot. And now it's your problem, right? If you don't love me anymore, here's everything. Which does kind of lead me on nicely to security. I was talking to a customer last week who is about to go live with a service, software as a service, for medical professionals that will handle personally identifiable data, and they'd built a beautiful, genuinely beautiful architecture, which was sitting in one subscription, which was backed by an Azure AD. But if you've ever created a subscription with a live ID, if you notice that it creates an Azure AD called sort of your live ID on Microsoft.com. And then they diligently and carefully created live IDs for all of their team and put them into that Azure AD as guest accounts. And that was their security. And I said, well, that's going to get interesting because they're personal accounts. So if somebody leaves, unless you're really careful and you revoke all of their access and authorization through the subscription, they can still log on. And it's going to be really hard to enforce multi-factor. And just-in-time admin, no, that won't work because you're using live accounts. And auditing is going to get interesting. So, if you learn nothing from today, please learn that if you are doing production real company projects on an Azure subscription, and that Azure subscription is not backed by your corporate AD, Azure AD, with corporate Azure AD accounts in, then that's the point that you go stop, wave the red flag and go, excuse me, can we sort this out first, please? Because if you don't sort it out early on in the process, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. Because you need to be able to tell people who's accessed their data and when. You need to be able to restrict that access to that data to just the people you need. I mean, look at Martin. Would you really trust him with access to your data? I mean, NuGet's fine, but, you know, he's not giving him a tax code. It's really important. And the thing is, Azure's sorted all that for us, right? Because everything's backed by an Azure AD tenant. All of your subscriptions can be backed by a single Azure AD tenant. And you can use groups and roles and RBAC all the way down, if you choose, to an individual row in an Azure SQL table. All of the services that you can deploy in Azure can, usually by some means or another and a bit of kicking, use things like service principals and managed service identities, which contains everything within your one single source of identity. And if we need to, we can force multi-factor auth for the people who are going to be managing and supporting these things. We can do really cool stuff. I know Carl does good sessions on things like just-in-time admin and just enough admin, where we can enable something to say, well, actually, I do trust Carl. And if Carl wants to administer the system, that's absolutely fine. But if he wants to do it, he has to get permission first. So he'll ask permission, and the system will send me a notification. And, you know, if he slipped me a tenner, I'll say yes, and it will elevate Carl's rights so he can do what he needs to do. But only for a prescribed amount of time, and then he'll need to apply again. And all of that process is audited. How hard is that to set up? Less than 5 minutes? That fair? Yeah. And you can prove through things like the Azure portal to your customers that you've done this in a manner which meets their compliance requirements and their data regulation requirements and all that kind of stuff. And why do you need to do it? Because people join and leave your organization all the time. And unless you're an organization of like 5 people, you're never going to know. How many of you work for large organizations where you sort of arrive the first day and somebody says, and here is your logon credentials, and you need to mail these people to get access to different systems, and there's these workflows for access to something else? Do they work in reverse? Do you say, please revoke my access to these systems when you leave? No, of course you don't, right? You just leave. And you kind of assume that they're going to tidy up behind you. Yeah, I've worked for organizations that you'd hope did that, and accounts are littered all over the place. But at least, if we're using Azure AD, then hopefully we can wire in that lever process to our CRM system and our HR system. And, Steve will charge you some reasonable consultancy rates to wire that and automate it with Logic Apps. So when I leave, my account gets disabled and I lose all access. Why is that important? Let me tell you a real horror story. So I was asked to help out with a company, and they provided a managed service which was running in Azure. And that service was used for ports of entry to the location they were based in. And their lead developer left. Fair enough. Before he left, he changed the billing address on the company credit card that was wired to pay for the pay-as-you-go subscription to his address. Then he revoked all access to the subscription for everybody but his live account. Then he revoked all access to the 3 Azure DevOps tenants for everything but his live account. And then he committed a really old set of source code over the top of Azure DevOps, purging everything else that was there before. Now, as it happens, Microsoft have procedures for dealing with stolen Azure accounts. That's great. They even have procedures for dealing with wiped Azure DevOps. But unfortunately, their backups don't go quite back far enough. So the company that I was working with, because they hadn't taken this seriously in the first place and put all of that governance and single Azure AD in, had to decompile the deployed binaries once they'd got access to the stuff running in Azure and try and recover the current source code, which was not pleasant. The economic impact of this can be huge. I've seen companies die in a fire for things like that, and they just didn't see it coming. But you can see it coming because there's this idiot in a bow tie sort of waving his arms at the front going, "Here be dragons." And then this one's pretty obvious, right? Or is it? So anybody that thinks cloud is cheap or cheaper hasn't quite really thought about why they're doing cloud. You do cloud because you want agility and flexibility and scalability and lots of volatilities Cheapability doesn't really necessarily exist as a word, and there's a reason for that. But particularly if we're a large organization, and especially if we're not, we want value, right? We don't want to put an ace or an ice in because your wallet screeches at you as you hit the deploy button for one of those, because lots of big expensive virtual machines get rolled out. And even if I only run one website or one Logic app, I'm paying quite a lot of money. What we really want is cost effectiveness. We want, pay to play. Yeah, first million executions of a function are free. That's like cocaine, isn't it? Nice, right? First million executions are free. So we want to make sure that we manage our costs right from the point of development. So we might want to put budgets in. In the Azure portal now, you can look at something called cost management. And I can say, this subscription or this resource group or this dev test lab has a budget of, well, I'm a Yorkshireman, so I've got deep pockets and short arms. So, I don't know, 30 euros a week. That'd be enough, right, Magnus? You can do the project on that, yeah? But I don't trust him, so then I can set alerts up. So I can say, when it passes 50% of the budget, send me an email, or 75%, or 100%. Which means if Magnus burns through 15 euros of his 30 in the first day, I can go, excuse me, what are you doing? You're going to run out of money by the end of the week, mate. It's just, I'm sorry. With the best will in the world, devs don't turn stuff off. And I know they don't, because a lot of them work for me. And frankly, because I don't. Here's a car crash for you. I burned through $12,000 worth of Azure credit that Microsoft gave me as an MVP because I forgot to turn off a BizTalk VM. I'll never do that again. We might, though, need to pass those costs on. Now, this might actually influence how we buy Azure in the first place. So, if we're a very large organization, we should probably think about an enterprise agreement. And that allows us to structure our Azure purchasing into divisions of our business. And we can get roll-up cost reporting, and we can get whizzy little spreadsheets, because accountants love spreadsheets, and we can send those out to our internal customers and go, look, here's your monthly billing. And we can use things like tags on resources to identify the components of our applications that relate to a specific internal customer to automate that billing. And then we can easily recharge. If we don't do that, then, well, I'm sorry, it's a sunk cost. IT just have to pay for everything that we're running. And that's the other reason, car crash number several in an occasional series, I had another customer who everything stopped one day. And they rang up and said, can you help? And it turned out that the subscriptions they were using were pay-as-you-go. They were attached to a corporate credit card of, to be fair, the IT director. You think, okay. The IT director left. So they cancelled the corporate credit card. And at the end of the month, everything stopped. So, corporates and commercial organizations don't use pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go is for individual people and small startups until they can get on the EA or the CSP bandwagon. And at least in part, right, we're doing this because we're in this to make money. It's often said these days that most organizations are software companies with a hobby. If you've ever seen Rasmus Hald, he jokes about Maersk being the largest consumer of containers in production worldwide. But joking aside, they've got a humongous IT development team putting in place software to drive the business. So they're looking for value and cost effectiveness, and they want to know how much it costs, and internally they want to recharge it. If I'm a software as a service provider, if I'm running Office 365, I want to know how much that fabric costs so I can work out how much I'm charging my customers so that I'm going to make money and not go broke because every month I pay out more than I get in running my services. How on earth am I doing for time? So, I said I wasn't going to talk a great deal about creating governance, and I'm not going to talk about a great deal about creating those heavyweight documents and all that kind of stuff that you probably need, and yes, your compliance guys are going to want all your procedures, all your written steps. But here are some of the building blocks that are straight out the gate in Azure that you can use, and if you can start well and put a tiny bit of thought into these things, you're set up and you're moving in a good direction. So little things. Work out a naming convention for everything you're going to deploy in Azure that makes sense to you and your team, so you can work out what project that's for, what customer that's for, maybe where it's deployed. If I have to search through 1 million resource groups called Peter's Ferret Project, Danny's Gerbil Herding Project, to get to the actual one, which is Customer Service This Makes Us Money Project, that's kind of hard. But if we've got a standard naming convention that tells us, is it a customer project? Is it a dev project? What project name is it? What region is it going to? That kind of thing. It makes it a lot easier. You might want to give careful thought to using subscriptions as a unit of structure. A subscription itself doesn't cost you anything unless you're running services on it. So why shouldn't we have several of them? And it might be that we start simple and we just have a development sub and a production sub. But if we've got lots of applications, or particularly if we've got business units, we might have the HR project dev sub and the HR project production sub and structure it like that. Why might we do that? Well, because a subscription is a great boundary of control. There's absolutely no way permissions that are granted on one subscription can leak into another. So my development team get all the access they like within reason to the dev sub. They can't access the prod sub at all. Our deployment pipeline, our Azure DevOps instance, that can manage it and deploy stuff. And then we've got just enough admin and all of the just-in-time wrappers for the support team who might need to climb in and do stuff. Resource tags are a bit of a hidden gem. Fortunately now, the portal team have really started to encourage you to use them. You'll notice, so when you create a new resource and you click new and you go new, I don't know, Azure Storage account, and you give it a name, that next screen that you tab straight past because you don't want to use it, that asks you for some tags. And try not to tab straight through it next time because it's genuinely useful, because you can tag things with project name, cost center number, project manager name. And then there's this thing now called Azure Resource Graph, and through the portal, I can look at everything I've got deployed, potentially across all of my subscriptions, and I can filter them and sort them by tag. And I can use those tags to generate reports, to generate billing and costing information for our internal customers. So they're incredibly useful. I've already talked about identity management. If you haven't already sorted out one single Azure AD and a source of corporate identity, then hit pause now, do that, transfer your subscriptions into that single source of identity and jettison all the live accounts, because that's really important, because that's where the biggest risk of accidental and particularly malicious data loss comes in. And related to that, we have RBAC. We all do it, right? Yeah, we've got a subscription. I need to work on Project X. Can I have rights? Oh yeah, I've made you an owner of the sub. Brilliant. I can beat that, actually. We said the other day to a customer, we're going to need access to your subscription. And they said, sure, here's the username and password for the owner account. And we went, whoa! Delete the email. Run. RBAC's really important. And RBAC in Azure is actually really easy because stuff gets inherited. So you should think about who you grant ownership of a subscription. Clue, barely nobody. Who you grant ownership of resource groups to. Do people need to be able to create resources? Do they only need to be able to see them or review them? And how much of this can we do within our deployment pipelines? Infrastructure as code is fantastic. Automation is fantastic. There's a really nice anecdote that one of the Azure DevOps guys talks about. And he said, you know what? We used to have all kinds of problems with expiring certificates. We'd write things down. We'd have wikis. We got all kinds of calendar alerts, but nobody ever remembered to renew all of the certs. He said, you know what? In the deployment pipeline now, every time we deploy, we generate a new cert. We deploy about once every 3 weeks. The cert has a lifetime of a year. We're fairly confident we're not going to get an expiring cert again. Good plan. And then all of this is great, but if we can't see what's going on, if we can't tell what people are doing, it doesn't really help us, does it? It's great that we can look back through our logs really carefully and discover that 3 months ago, Eldert, who's left now, left the building with all of our customer data so we could sell it to somebody else, but that was 3 months ago. There's a load of cool stuff in Azure that allows you to do alerts based on the logging and telemetry that's coming out of not just your application, if you want to use log analytics or app insights, but also Azure Fabric. Azure emits auditing events. So every time something happens, you can see that in things like Azure Monitor. And you can set up alerts and triggers. So you could say, I don't know, if a new resource group pops up over there, can you send me an alert, please? If somebody deletes that, send me an alert, please. And you can report on activity. You need to think about what you need to know from the get-go. Because it's like what Martin was saying with his Azure Search schema. You need to put a lot of thought into that up front because it's really hard to modify. It's not that it's hard to modify the cloud, but if you don't realize you need to report on an individual project name, how will you know to put project name as a tag or in your naming conventions or things like that? And what happens then if you realize 6 months later and you think, oh, damn, we've really got that naming convention wrong, but now we're stuck with it? It's definitely Peter's gerbil herding project and that's it, we're gone. Fortunately, in addition to all of these little tools and widgets and Lego bricks to help us construct some of this governance, Azure also has some Lego bricks to help us actually apply that governance and see what governance is applied to a subscription and validate it and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to talk about this for very long, partly because I know I'm standing between you and running away home, but I would urge you to look at these things. Azure policies allow you to put rules on your subscriptions. So all of those things I was ranting about earlier, thou shalt not to deploy to a region other than UK South, we can write a policy to do that. It's half a dozen lines of JSON, and basically it says, if region not equal to UK South, block. So when I try to deploy a resource, if I've set that policy on my subscription, it will fail. The Azure Fabric will refuse to deploy, and it'll tell me it's because I've violated a policy. I can also use policies to audit. So I can look at specific actions and audit when it happens. And Microsoft provide a whole bunch of samples for this. There are GitHub repos with Azure policies in. And you can take those policies and combine them and use them with something called Azure Blueprints, which, as I was joking to somebody yesterday, don't confuse Azure Blueprints with Azure Blueprints. If you Google for Azure Blueprints, your first hit is genuinely useful. It's all about architectural blueprints. Here's how to design your application to meet ISO 27001 or UK official, that kind of stuff. Those are not the blueprints you're looking for. Azure Blueprints is a service that allows you to templatize your governance and apply that to a subscription. So I can create a blueprint, and I can say, right, this blueprint is Rik's gorgeous dev sub blueprint, and I can pull in RBAC permissions, and I can say, right, Rik gets to be owner, Magnus gets to be a reader, Carl gets to be a contributor. I can put some policies in, we're only going to deploy to UK South. I can control by policy what resource types I can deploy. So I'm absolutely going to ban virtual machines because friends don't let friends do IaaS, so they're going to go off the list for a start. And I might choose to put some audit policies in. I can save that blueprint and I can version control that blueprint as well, which is really handy. And then I can take that and apply it to a subscription. And when I apply that blueprint, it will put all of those RBAC assignments on, and it'll put all those policies on, and it'll audit the fact that it did it, and I can track and trace what blueprints are assigned to what subscription, and I can see what's contained in a blueprint. So when our auditor walks in, I can just say, this is going to be an easy meeting. You sit there, sir. Here's your coffee. Let me just show you how we do things. Tick. And showing them how we do things could be using resource graph, which as far as I'm concerned is dark magic, because this thing allows you to see and query all of the stuff you've got deployed in all of your Azure subscriptions with like seconds. You know, I choose to filter by tag name, and like that, they're all there. I've got thousands of resources. It's really, really useful. And you can quickly say, I want to see all of my virtual machines. I want to see all of the virtual machines assigned to, I don't know, Project George that are running. Click, 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 done. So easy, so useful. And then moving on, we've got management groups. So I said that you can have lots and lots of subscriptions, right? And I said you should start to try and align those to your internal business structures. Management groups help us define that business structure. So I can have Megacorp at the top, and then I can say UK region, European region, UK HR, European HR, all of that kind of stuff. And then I can hang subscriptions off those points in the management group hierarchy, and I can explore that. In a perfect world, I'd be able to apply a blueprint to a management group and have it ripple down. Unfortunately, it's not quite that perfect yet, but I can use that management group as a start of a 10, and it'll show me all of the subscriptions that are in that management group, and I can quickly assign a blueprint to them. So I can start to structure my Azure subscriptions and resources in a way that reflects my business, and most organizations understand how their business is structured, right? So wouldn't it be a great thing if we could just structure all our cloud services in a way that we innately understand? And then finally, I've already talked about Azure cost management, how we can keep a track on consumption. We can get some really nice graphs, because graphs are great about what we're spending, but we can put alerts on if we spend too much. We can set budgets. We can do all kinds of cool things. So when I burned through my 12 grand, I could go to the portal and go, show me what I've spent over the past month. And it goes, virtual machines, $12,000. Brilliant. That was a great Christmas present. So, I am almost certainly ahead of time, because I rant and I speak quickly. The best starting place to go and look at stuff like this, God bless them, Microsoft have got a link for you. Have I got a link for you? I'm not asking a tenner, I'm not even asking a fiver. I'll give you it for free. aka.ms/governance docs is your jumping off point to learn about the areas you might want to write governance for. Really helpful scaffolding for what you might need, particularly if you need to be compliant with particular things like ISO 27001 or Sarbanes-Oxley or UK official. There's stuff in there about all of the technologies that I've talked about, so blueprints and policies and that kind of thing. There are links to GitHub repos and resources and all kinds of things that'll tell you far more than a mad idiot Englishman ranting for 45 minutes. And on that note, you have been watching. My name is Rik Hepworth. I am an Azure consultant. The deck is already in my GitHub. All you need to know is my Twitter handle and my GitHub, and you can find everything about me except my inside leg measurement. That comes with a charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. You do get a little carried away when you talk about these things.
Well, you know, governance, it's exciting stuff. It's real nail-biting, edge-of-the-seat stuff.
That's right.
Right?
Any questions on governance for Rik? Or on anything else, by the way?
I shoot them in the head is the answer to that. So
The
question was that the idea of creating subscriptions and manage them is a good one, but what do we do with the old ones? And actually particularly relates to what do we do with the ones we created wrong, yeah? Yeah. So part of the trick with that is, and this comes back to resource graph, if all of your subscriptions are backed by the same Azure AD tenant, then you have visibility of resources across all of those subscriptions. And one of the ways that I help customers migrate from that, we did it wrong, it was live IDs, is we change the Azure AD tenant from the one that they originally had to the one that we want. We pull the subscription into our hierarchy. Now we can see all the resources. We can move the ones we want between subscriptions, and then when we've emptied the subscription, we go into that subscription account, we detach it from our Azure AD so we don't have anything hanging around, and then we go and terminate the subscription. Now, if you're using an EA or CSP, you've got a lot more visibility of all of those subscriptions because you've created them from one single point of truth. If they're all pay-as-you-go, it can be hard, genuinely, particularly if they're not all attached to an Azure AD. That's one of those where you're always going to get the odd outlier, and that's where a paper process comes in play, where you go, hang on a minute, that's not a subscription that looks right, and you invoke that process. But if you've got them all under a single Azure AD, then you've got a lot more visibility and a lot more tools in the box. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, we've finished that Spike project, and we're going to throw away the subscription that was with it, and just delete the whole subscription, and everything goes away. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in fact, yeah, I have dead subscriptions that I've killed through the years, and you know, I don't grieve them at all. They serve their purpose. Yes, no, absolutely. You can use policies and auditing and cleanup. Yep. And obviously, we can start using our DevOps pipeline to delete stuff after we've run our tests and all that kind of thing. It's always better to do it quickly than do it right. I challenge the word better, but yeah, you're right. It's where's the value? Yeah, so I normally respond to that, and I use 2 magic words that will strike fear into the heart of any C-level executive. Business risk. What's it going to cost us if it all goes wrong? It's probably going to take us a week or 2. We could work out all of this scaffolding in 1 sprint, right? Because we're all bright, it's not going to be difficult. 1 sprint, give us 1 sprint. If we don't do that 1 sprint, what's it worth if we lose all of our customers' data? Or we accidentally put, and this is another one good for you. So NHS England, they built the UK data centres, right? We've got UK South and UK West. UK South is in Slough. That's in England. UK West is in Wales. NHS England says you can't move your data outside of England. How am I going to do my geo pairing with that one? You know, what's the lawsuit worth? I mean, crikey, Equifax got stung for God knows how many million. I always do it that way, and I very rarely find that management in the customers that I flag that with then don't give the time to the dev team. And you know, if the devs raise it, actually they get appreciation for the fact that they've gone, there's business risk here, we really shouldn't. So that would be my approach to that one.
Good point.
Any more for any more. I'm a slow-moving target, I'm old.
Additional questions?
Sure.
Yeah, go.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about end user accounts, if we're doing that through Azure AD, then I almost always am working with that customer to synchronize their Active Directory with their Azure AD. You can also federate if you want to go that step further, but the synchronization means that if my password expires on-prem in my Active Directory, when I change it, it will ripple through automatically to Azure AD. And if you are wanting to do that joined up identity, I'd strongly suggest that you do that. Large organizations particularly, you've got an Active Directory, you're comfortable managing it. So people get synchronized with Azure AD coming in through AD. Your service principals, your managed service identities, those are cloud specific. So we'll create those in Azure AD and we'll manage them in Azure AD. But people will do through a workflow and a process that as an organization we're already comfortable with and people already understand. And then potentially we get the benefit of, I've signed into my workstation as Rik, and when I try and log into the cloud, because it's using the same account creds as Azure AD, I can sign in automatically with my current Windows token if I'm using things like NTLM, ADFS. Nearly the right acronym. That. Okay.
Cool. All right. That was the 5-second rule. Awesome. I think we're done. Thank you guys for coming to this conference, and basically, mic drop. Peace out.